Welcome to Skytech-Lens. In August 2025, the Trump administration stunned the world by doubling tariffs on Indian goods from 25% to a staggering 50%. Nearly 70% of India's exports to the US were suddenly hit, sending shockwaves from Mumbai's ports to New York's boardrooms. The move shattered decades of careful US-India partnership, plunging both economies into chaos and uncertainty. Indian exporters faced devastating losses overnight, while American importers saw their business models collapse. This wasn't just a trade dispute, it was a fundamental disruption to global commerce, threatening millions of livelihoods on both sides. The world watched as a simmering disagreement exploded into a crisis, raising urgent questions about the future of international trade and alliances. The White House justified the tariffs as punishment for India's continued purchase of discounted Russian oil, claiming it undermined Western unity against Moscow. The administration framed the move as a matter of principle and national security, but critics saw it as a dangerous overreach. Many argued that targeting India, a key Indo-Pacific partner, risked alienating an essential counterweight to China. Senators from agricultural states warned of inevitable retaliation, fearing for their own export markets. The message was clear. U.S. partnerships now came with strict conditions, and economic interdependence could be weaponized at any moment. In trying to force India's hand, the U.S. may have underestimated both India's resilience and the long-term consequences of its actions. India's response was swift and defiant, rooted in the language of sovereignty. The foreign minister declared energy security a non-negotiable national priority, rejecting the idea of sacrificing Indian interests for U.S. policy. The government announced emergency relief for affected industries and hinted at retaliatory tariffs on sensitive U.S. goods. India's tradition of strategic autonomy was on full display. Capitulation was not an option. Behind the scenes, diplomats accelerated efforts to deepen ties with Europe, Japan, and BRICS nations, seeking alternatives to U.S. dependence. The crisis became a test of national pride and strategic identity, not just economics. India's multi-pronged strategy: cushion the blow at home, prepare for retaliation, and diversify global partnerships. On the ground in India, the human cost was immediate and severe. The sudden shockwaves of the trade war were felt not in boardrooms, but in the everyday lives of workers and families. For many, the news arrived not as headlines but as the abrupt silence of idle machines and the uncertainty of paychecks that might never come. In Noida, a city known for its bustling garment factories, U.S. orders vanished almost overnight. The hum of sewing machines faded, replaced by anxious conversations and the heavy air of uncertainty. Hundreds of thousands of jobs once considered stable were suddenly on the line. For many workers, the factory was more than just a workplace, it was a lifeline for entire families. The crisis didn't stop at the factory gates. In the fields of Uttar Pradesh, Mentha farmers watched their livelihoods wither as export orders froze. Mentha oil, a key ingredient in products worldwide, had been a reliable source of income. Now, with debts mounting and no buyers in sight, families faced the grim prospect of selling land or taking on more loans just to survive. The pain rippled outward, touching diamond cutters in Surat, shrimp farmers in Andhra Pradesh, and carpet weavers in Kashmir. Each industry, deeply connected to global markets, saw orders dry up and wages stall. For millions, the threat wasn't just temporary hardship, it was the risk of losing a way of life built over generations. Financial analysts estimated that up to 2 million jobs could be lost across these sectors, a staggering number that revealed just how intertwined India's economy had become with the US and the wider world. The ripple effects extended beyond factories and farms, straining local economies and social safety nets. For small farmers and factory workers, the trade war was not a distant policy debate, it was an existential threat. Every day brought new worries: how to pay school fees, afford medicine, or put food on the table. The uncertainty seeped into homes, changing family conversations and future plans. The collapse of export revenues threatened to push entire communities into cycles of debt and poverty. In rural villages, shops closed and families packed up belongings, sometimes forced to migrate in search of work. Children walked past shuttered businesses, their futures clouded by forces far beyond their control. The crisis laid bare the fragility of global supply chains and the real-world stakes of international policy decisions. For millions in India, the trade war was not just a story of numbers and tariffs. It was a daily struggle for dignity, stability, and hope. In the US, small businesses dependent on Indian imports faced their own crisis. Companies like Thomson Traders in North Carolina saw profit margins wiped out, forced to choose between massive price hikes or shutting down. Retailers and importers across the country scrambled as costs soared and supply chains broke down. With inflation already high, the tariffs threatened to push prices even further, hitting American consumers hardest. In New York's jewelry district and Michigan's auto industry, the cost of Indian components surged, risking layoffs and lost competitiveness. Union leaders and business owners alike warned that tariffs were a tax on Americans, not just a blow to India. The pain ricocheted across borders, exposing the myth that trade wars have clear winners. The tariff crisis deepened political divisions in Washington. Democrats condemned the move as reckless, arguing it sacrificed a vital partnership for short-term political gain. Even many Republicans, especially from farm states, warned of devastating retaliation against U.S. agriculture. The debate split. The Capitol protectionists demanded tough action, while free trade advocates warned of inflation and global instability. Industry lobbyists flooded Capitol Hill, highlighting the chaos and unpredictability of the new policy environment. The crisis forced a reckoning. Was the U.S. a reliable ally or a transactional power willing to punish partners at will? With the U.S. market closing, a ripple effect was felt across the globe. The economic landscape was shifting, and nowhere was this more evident than in the intricate dance between India and China. India was pushed toward deeper economic ties with China, its regional rival and strategic adversary. This was not just a matter of convenience, but a strategic necessity driven by the changing global dynamics. Major Indian conglomerates accelerated partnerships with Chinese firms in critical sectors like electric vehicles and clean energy. These collaborations promised technological advancements and economic growth, but they also came with strings attached. India's trade deficit with China ballooned, creating an economic imbalance that was hard to ignore. The numbers told a story of dependency and vulnerability. This increasing trade deficit gave Beijing more leverage, heightening the strategic risk for New Delhi. The power dynamics in the region were shifting, and not in India's favor. The tariffs imposed by the U.S. forced India to rely more on China, a move that seemed counterintuitive but was necessary for economic stability. This reliance, however, came at a cost, undermining years of U.S.-led efforts to counterbalance Chinese influence in Asia. India scrambled to diversify its trade partnerships, seeking to reduce its dependency on China, seeking new trade deals with Europe and Japan, hoping to build stronger economic ties that could offer a counterweight to China's growing influence. But such shifts take years to materialize. Building new trade routes and establishing trust with new partners is a long-term endeavor. In the short term, China filled the void left by the U.S., flooding the Indian market with its goods and services. This immediate influx was a boon for Beijing, a development welcomed in Beijing. The Chinese government saw this as an opportunity to solidify its economic foothold in the region. Ironically, the U.S. policy intended to punish India ended up strengthening China's hand in the region. The strategic miscalculation had far-reaching consequences. The strategic fallout was immediate. The U.S.-India partnership weakened, and China's influence grew. The geopolitical landscape had been irrevocably altered, with China emerging as the unexpected beneficiary. The trade war triggered a geopolitical crisis, shaking the foundations of the U.S.-India alliance. What began as a dispute over tariffs quickly spiraled into a much deeper rift, exposing vulnerabilities in what was once considered an unbreakable partnership. The economic measures intended to protect domestic industries sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels, leaving both sides questioning the reliability of their closest allies and the broader Quad partnership. The tariffs signaled to India and the world that Washington viewed its partners as subordinate, not equal. This perception of hierarchy undermined years of careful diplomacy, making it harder for leaders to present a united front. The sense of betrayal was palpable, with Indian officials voicing concerns about the future of cooperation on security, technology, and trade. This erosion of trust threatened the effectiveness of the Quad, the key alliance countering China in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad, designed to be a pillar of stability and a bulwark against growing Chinese assertiveness, now faced internal divisions. Joint military exercises and intelligence sharing, once routine, became fraught with hesitation and second-guessing. Allies in Japan and Australia watched with alarm, fearing the alliance's unity was unraveling. Business leaders and policymakers in Tokyo and Canberra worried that the rift would spill over into economic and security cooperation, weakening their own positions in a region already fraught with uncertainty. A weakened US-India relationship left the Quad less able to present a united front, creating opportunities for China to expand its influence. Beijing wasted no time, stepping up diplomatic outreach and economic investments across the Indo-Pacific, eager to exploit the cracks in the alliance. The fallout extended beyond the Quad, undermining America's entire Indo-Pacific strategy and sending a chilling message to other allies. Southeast Asian nations, already wary of choosing sides, saw the discord as a sign that US commitments could be fleeting, prompting them to hedge their bets and seek new partnerships. The tariffs, meant to show strength, risked being remembered as the moment America's strategic position in Asia began to erode. In the end, the true cost of the trade war was not just economic, but the weakening of alliances that had taken decades to build. As the dust settled, both nations faced a stark new reality. Would India retaliate with tariffs on US agriculture, escalating the conflict? Or would both sides seek an off-ramp before more damage was done? The crisis forced a fundamental reassessment of the US-India partnership. Could trust be rebuilt, or was a permanent fracture inevitable? For the US, the episode exposed the limits of economic coercion and the risks of alienating key allies. For India, it was a lesson in the dangers of over-reliance on any single partner. The world watched, uncertain if either side would adapt or double down. One thing was clear: the old rules of global alliances were gone, and a far more complex era had begun. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more updates.